Welcome back, everyone. For today's deep dive, we're headed to Southeast Asia.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Cambodia specifically. We're going to be exploring the legacy of the Khmer Rouge regime, 40 years after its fall.
Yeah. It's hard to believe it's been that long, huh? I think a lot of people, at least in the West, their knowledge of the Khmer Rouge is kind of limited to, like, the killing fields.
Right, exactly. And that's
Uh-huh.
such a small, albeit horrific, piece of the story. This period, it continues to shape Cambodia in some pretty profound ways, even
Mm.
4 decades later.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so important to understand. So, what are we looking at today? What's our source material?
Well, we'll be diving into a Time magazine article titled 40 Years After the Fall of the Khmer Rouge, Cambodia Still Grapples with Pol Pot's Brutal Legacy.
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, and to give you an idea of the scale of this tragedy, we're talking about between 1.7 and 3 million people.
Wow.
Yeah, up to one-fifth of the population perished under the Khmer Rouge between 1975 and 1979.
It's a truly staggering statistic. To really grasp how this horrific period continues to influence Cambodia today, I think we have to dig into the events that led up to it. We need to understand the context.
Totally. Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 1975, right?
Mhm.
Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, they seize power, promising, get this, an agrarian utopia.
An agrarian utopia. Okay. On the surface, I guess it sounds appealing. Back to nature, simplicity, all that. But we know how that turned out.
Yeah, not exactly a peaceful return to nature.
Yeah.
So what was the thinking behind this so-called utopia? What were they really after?
Well, at its core, the ideology was rooted in a very particular interpretation of Marxism, a very, frankly, warped interpretation. They were obsessed with this idea of a completely classless society, and they were willing to use any means necessary to achieve it.
So forced labor camps, mass executions.
Yeah, all part of their twisted vision. It's hard to even comprehend the level of violence and brutality they inflicted in the name of this ideology.
It's chilling. They weren't just targeting specific individuals either, right? They went after entire groups of people.
You're exactly right. Anyone they perceived as a threat to their vision. Intellectuals, professionals, artists, monks, ethnic minorities, you name it. If you didn't fit into their narrow definition of what a true Cambodian should be, you were in danger.
And get this, they even abolished money, religion, and traditional culture. They literally tried to erase Cambodia's identity.
Yeah, think about that. No money, no religion, no culture. It's like they wanted to create this blank slate, this completely controlled environment where they could impose their will on everyone.
Cambodia, which they renamed Democratic Hakuchea, became a shell of its former self. It's almost impossible to grasp the magnitude of the suffering they inflicted.
It's a tragedy on an unimaginable scale. And, it serves as a stark warning about the dangers of ideological extremism taken to the extreme. The Khmer Rouge's vision for Cambodia, as twisted as it was, had devastating consequences for its people. Absolutely. So then comes the fall of the regime, right? January 7th, 1979, a Vietnam-backed invasion forces the Khmer Rouge out. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? Justice served, the bad guys defeated.
Well, not quite. And this is where things start to get really complicated. The Khmer Rouge, despite everything they'd done, actually retained international support for years after being ousted.
Seriously, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
After all the atrocities, all the deaths.
It's a messy situation for sure. Part of it had to do with Cold War politics. Despite their horrific human rights record, the Khmer Rouge were seen by some as a bulwark against Vietnamese influence in the region.
So basically, they were propped up by other countries because it served their interests.
Unfortunately, yes. Realpolitik at its worst.
Wow. Okay, so they're out of power but still have this international support. What was happening within Cambodia at this point?
Cambodia was trying to pick up the pieces, but it wasn't easy. The country was devastated. They had a civil war that dragged on into the early 1990s, further destabilizing the nation.
So even after the Khmer Rouge were gone, the country continued to suffer. And it sounds like the Khmer Rouge's influence didn't just disappear either.
No, it didn't. It's hard to overstate the long shadow they cast. And here's where things get even more complicated. Many former Khmer Rouge figures, including Hun Sen, remained in positions of power.
Hun Sen. So the guy who's been in power since 1985.
The very same. And as we mentioned, his government has faced a lot of criticism over the years for limiting democratic freedoms and suppressing dissent. This is where the legacy of the Khmer Rouge gets really tangled up in present-day politics. It's impossible to separate the two.
It sounds like it. So you have this horrific period of violence and oppression, followed by years of instability and civil war, and all the while, Former members of the Khmer Rouge are holding on to power. It's a lot to process.
It's heavy stuff, and it raises some really tough questions about justice, accountability, and the possibility of true reconciliation. How do you move forward as a nation when the ghosts of the past are so present?
That's a great question.
Mm.
So how does a country begin to heal from something this traumatic? Is it even possible to move forward when the past is so deeply intertwined with the present?
It's a tough question. I mean, Cambodia today, it's like they're trying to find that balance, right? Trying to move forward, but still carrying the weight of everything that happened.
Yeah, yeah. And I imagine it's not like there's one clear path to healing.
Right. It's super complex. And then you have this whole other layer, this generational divide. You've got a lot of Cambodians today who didn't live through the Khmer Rouge era. I mean, they have no direct experience of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Does that mean, like, the trauma is fading with time?
Well, some people think so. The historian David Chandler, he actually suggests that, yeah, he points to the fact that Cambodia has a very young population.
Makes sense.
Yeah, lots of people weren't even alive during the Khmer Rouge year, so.
So the collective memory is kind of fading.
Yeah, potentially. But then on the flip side, you have someone like journalist Sebastian Strangio, and he argues that the legacy of the Khmer Rouge is being actively, I guess, politicized.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just fading away.
No, not really. Strangio's argument is that the government is deliberately using this narrative, positioning themselves as the saviors who rescued Cambodia from the Khmer Rouge to strengthen their hold on power.
So instead of, like, genuine reconciliation and dialogue.
Yeah, they're controlling the narrative, basically.
That's kind of cynical, but I can see how it would happen. I mean, imagine being a survivor and seeing your former tormentors still in positions of power. That's got to be incredibly difficult to process.
Yeah, you're telling me. And it raises all these questions, right? Like, how can you even begin to heal when something like that's going on? I mean, where's the justice?
It's heavy stuff. I mean, it's like this impossible situation. To move forward, you have to look back, but looking back is so painful.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so politically charged that it feels almost impossible to even have an honest conversation about it. So what happens then? How can a nation truly heal and move forward without, like, fully acknowledging and addressing its history?
Especially when that history is so recent and the wounds are still so raw. So what does this all mean for Cambodia going forward? Like, is there any way out of this cycle?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? It kind of forces us to grapple with some really profound questions. I mean, how can Cambodia navigate this super complex, historical and political landscape? How can they create space for real dialogue and reconciliation while also, like, being sensitive to all these political issues? It's tough.
Yeah, I can only imagine. It's like, how do you even begin to heal from something so traumatic?
Yeah.
And is forgetting even an option?
I don't know if forgetting is ever really the answer, especially with trauma like this. It's about acknowledging the past, understanding the complexities of it, and then learning from it. That's how you move forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can't just sweep something this horrific under the rug and pretend it never happened, right?
Right. But, and this is key, it's not going to be easy. Memorials and things like that, they're important, but they have to be part of a bigger effort. Like, you got to address the root causes of what happened. There needs to be a commitment to justice and doing everything possible to make sure it doesn't happen again.
I mean, that sounds like a massive undertaking, right? Where do you even begin?
Well, Cambodia has taken some steps. Like, there's the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, sometimes called the Khmer Rouge Tribunal. It's a UN-backed thing. And it was set up to try the senior leaders of the Khmer Rouge regime for crimes against humanity, genocide, all that.
Right. Yeah, I remember hearing about that. Didn't they convict 2 Khmer Rouge leaders back in, was it 2018?
Yep. Nguyen Che, they called him Brother Number 2, and Khieu Samphan, the former head of state, both found guilty of genocide and crimes against humanity, sentenced to life in prison.
Wow. That feels significant, right? Like a step towards some kind of accountability.
Yeah.
But it also seems like just a tiny piece of this much bigger puzzle.
Yeah, for sure. It's a long road to recovery, but it's important to recognize how big the challenge is, right? Like, you have to understand the deep impact of the Khmer Rouge, all the political stuff that happened afterward, and how hard it is to achieve reconciliation. All of those things are key to understanding Cambodia today.
So basically, while they've made some progress towards justice and reconciliation, Cambodia is still very much grappling with the legacy of the Khmer Rouge.
Oh, absolutely. It's a complicated and heartbreaking story, but it's one that needs to be told. And this is important. It's a story that goes beyond Cambodia,
What do you mean?
Well, the story of the Khmer Rouge, it's like it's a warning, right, about how dangerous ideology can be, how fragile democracy is, and how trauma can last for generations. Like, it makes you think critically, it makes you value empathy, and it makes you realize how important truth and justice are, not just in Cambodia, but everywhere.
That's powerful. I mean, those are big lessons. But I guess my question is, what can we as individuals actually do with this knowledge? It's easy to feel overwhelmed by, like, the sheer scale of the tragedy. What can we do that would actually make a difference?
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming, for sure. But that's not an excuse to just turn away. We got to engage with these tough parts of history,
Yeah.
however hard it might be.
Okay, I get that. But what does that engagement look like? What are some real, concrete steps we can take?
Well, you got to start by learning. Like, really learn about the Khmer Rouge regime, the details, all of it. You can also support the organizations that are working in Cambodia. They're the ones on the ground doing the work.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about knowing, it's about doing something with that knowledge.
Right. We have a responsibility to learn from the past, not just for Cambodia, but for everyone.
I like that. So learning about the Khmer Rouge is just the first step. Then we have to find ways to take that knowledge and do something with it.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that reconciliation isn't like a finish line, It's a process.
It's a journey. And it's a journey we can all be a part of.
Yeah, that's right. And by learning from the past, we can hopefully help build a future where these kinds of atrocities don't happen again.
That's the hope.
It's a hope worth fighting for.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. I mean, the Khmer Rouge's reign of terror was just horrific. But Cambodia's resilience and their drive to move forward is pretty inspiring.
It is, yeah. It shows you how strong the human spirit can be. Like, even in the face of unimaginable suffering, there's still this capacity for healing and growth.
And it underscores how important it is to confront these tough truths, to fight for justice, and to work towards a more peaceful world. For everyone.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And for everyone listening, as you keep learning about this and thinking about the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, I want you to think about this. What lessons can we learn from their experience? And how can we use those lessons to make things better? Not just for Cambodia, but for all of us.
You know, when you mentioned those organizations working in Cambodia, I was wondering, like, what are they actually doing? What kind of work is happening on the ground?
Yeah, there are a lot of incredible groups doing amazing work. Some of them are focused on like documenting everything that happened, like all the atrocities committed by the Khmer Rouge.
It's important work.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's tough, but it's essential, right? Like, to make sure that those stories aren't forgotten. And then you have other organizations that are like directly supporting survivors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they provide counseling, healthcare, even job training to help people rebuild their lives. It's amazing.
That's incredible. So it's not just about acknowledging the past, it's about helping people heal and move forward.
Exactly. And then there are groups focused on education too, making sure that younger generations learn about the Khmer Rouge era.
That's so important.
Yeah, it helps prevent, history from repeating itself. And then some are also focused on the justice side of things, advocating for accountability and pushing for legal action against those responsible.
So there's a lot going on, it sounds like. And it makes me feel a little, I don't know, less overwhelmed. Like
Yeah.
knowing there are people out there actively working to make things better.
I know what you mean. It can feel heavy, all of this. So I think it's important to remember that, even small actions can make a difference. Like donating to these organizations, even a small amount can have a big impact.
Yeah, for sure. What else? What can our listeners do?
Well, spreading the word is huge, like sharing their stories on social media, talking about their work, raising awareness, that kind of thing. And even just having conversations with your friends and family, just getting people talking about these issues, it all contributes to a greater understanding.
So it's like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Learning about the Khmer Rouge regime is just the first step.
Yeah.
And then it's about figuring out how to translate that knowledge into action.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a process, reconciliation, I mean. It's not like there's an end point. It's a journey.
And it's a journey that we can all be a part of, in a way. Like, by learning from the past, maybe we can help create a future where atrocities like this never happen again.
That's the hope. And it's definitely a hope worth fighting for.
Well said. This has been a really powerful deep dive. The Khmer Rouge's reign of terror, I mean, it was a horrific chapter in human history. But Cambodia's resilience is something else. It's incredibly inspiring to see their determination to move forward.
It is. Their story really speaks to the strength of the human spirit, that ability to heal and grow even after experiencing unimaginable suffering.
And it reminds us how important it is to keep pushing for justice, to confront difficult truths, and to work towards a more peaceful world. For everyone, not just Cambodia, for everyone.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap things up here. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.